From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And right away, we'll hand it on over to Britton Rucker and her guest, K-State's Gregg Hanzlicek. They'll discuss seasonal parasite control for the cattle herd, focusing on the options for strategically deworming cattle coming off grass, as well as controlling lice through the fall and winter. Britton also brings us excerpts from another Cattle Chat podcast from the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. The central topic there, upgrading cattle working facilities. Featured there, K-State's Brad White, Bob Larson, Bob Weaber, Dustin Pendell, and a guest contributor. And on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Jared Hoyle talks about post-seeding management of newly planted cool season lawns. It's all here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. With fall just around the corner, it's a good time to consider, or rather reconsider, a few production practices. Management of parasites can be detrimental to your beef cattle operation in terms of your bottom line more than you may realize. Effective parasite control can have a greater economic impact on cow-calf operations. Here to speak more on external and internal parasite management and practices is the Director of Field Investigations Unit at the K-State Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, Gregg Hanzlicek. Now, Gregg, in your words, what is the importance of parasite control?
The importance of parasite control is what we're wanting to do is to minimize the number of parasites in our herd to optimize the amount of income that producers are getting from their product. And it's kind of hard to measure, but in 2007 there was an Iowa State study that showed that herds that didn't use dewormers, looking at internal parasites, they were at a $200 loss per pair over that year. And as producers understand, $200 is a huge amount of money. And that's money that is unmeasurable. Right. So they wouldn't recognize that they're losing that, but it's real. It's a real loss.
What parasites are you focusing on in the internal side?
Internal side, there's basically 2 or 3 worms that are important: Ostratagia, Homunculus, and Couperia. We kind of just throw them all together and say, okay, we're going to try to control them all. And so that is our key, is to, number one, reduce pasture contamination, and then we reduce the internal parasite load on the calves as we come off of pasture.
What are some key elements to preventing these issues?
Well, the major thing is strategic deworming. When should we deworm? And traditionally we've said, let's deworm all the cows and maybe the calves when we go to pasture. Again, we're trying to reduce pasture contamination. And then deworm them all, both the calves and the cows, when we come off of pasture, because we know that that's where they're actually going to pick up those worms is during the grazing season. That's traditionally the way we go. There's lots of programs out there, and really what producers should use is their veterinarian's advice on what product to use. We're very limited on the number of products we can use. Use our veterinarian advice for those 2 things. Now,
what environments do you see more parasite control being needed, and how do they spread?
Great question. So we're typically going to see more internal parasite issues when it's not cold weather. So they really like warm weather. So in the southern part of the United States, they have to deal with internal parasites year-round, basically. For us in the Midwest, it's a pasture issue. And to kind of go into the life cycle is that these adult worms live in the animals. They live in either the stomach or the intestines, and they produce eggs, which are then passed in the manure. Manure is dumped in the pasture, and then those eggs actually molt, and they become larvae. And then those larvae actually squirm away from the manure pats, crawl up grass, and then some other animal comes along, eats the grass, takes in the larvae. The larvae become adults. They start passing eggs. It's a cycle. But it's primarily we're concerned about it during the spring, summer, early fall pasture season.
And again, getting your veterinarian in there and getting samples is key to really getting a handle on this.
Absolutely, and that's one of the greatest questions, or biggest question we have is, how do you know if your program is working? Because we talked about in the introduction that there's a loss there, but it's hard to measure. Mm-hmm. One of a really good test called the fecal egg count reduction test is simple to do. It's inexpensive, and all it takes is for a producer to grab 20% of the animal's manure, and whichever is smallest, and send that to a qualified laboratory and have them count how many eggs per gram of the manure. That's when they deworm them. Mm-hmm. Then they come back 14 days later and do the same thing and have the same test completed. If there isn't a 95% reduction in the number of eggs from pre-deworming to after deworming, then our product selection is probably not appropriate.
And really switch it up and try something new.
Absolutely, and there, one of the things now that we're talking about is that perhaps it makes more sense to use more than one product at a time. Again, we're limited on number of products, and none are labeled to use with each other in conjunction. Mm-hmm. So again, they'll have to go through their veterinarian, use their advice and their expertise.
Now, in terms of product, you are seeing resistance to these dewormers.
We are, and it started years ago in one class, and there's some thought out there that there's some other chemicals that they're showing resistance to. So it is becoming a huge issue in the cow-calf operations. Now,
how do you recommend to reduce this resistance?
Well, that's a great question. So the reason we think there's resistance today is that, number one, as these products became inexpensive, sometimes we were using them too often. And so every time we use a dewormer, we're not going to kill every worm. We're going to kill only those that are susceptible to the chemical. And when we do that many, many times, the only worms that are left in the animals are those that are resistant to the chemical. Mm-hmm. So too often use, we think, is what's done it. The other thing is we underdose. I mean, a lot of times we'll set the dewormer gun mm-hmm. on the average weight of the animal in the herd. And if you think about it, we're underdosing those that weigh more. And so that has contributed to the deworming. There's some thought out there because we moved to pour-on dewormers, and they aren't as absorbed as obviously as an injectable, that maybe the amount of chemical in the animals was less. And again, we were selecting only for those animals that are very, very susceptible. Now,
go into a little bit of pour-on versus injectable.
Well, they both have their positives and negatives. Obviously, the pour-on is more convenient. We don't have to be concerned about BQA, about sub-Q, and doing it in the right spot. And there are pour-on products that will control lice and will control internal parasites, so they're convenient. Mm-hmm. Again, that goes back to what the veterinarian sees in their area as the products and the form of administration is more useful in their area.
So really best fit to your operation.
Absolutely. Yep. There isn't any one deworming program that fits everybody. They need to be catered a little bit from operation to operation.
And from season to season, too.
Absolutely, from season to season.
And there is a new program to getting away from resistance.
Absolutely, and it's called Refugia, and it's a strategy to make sure that we don't get into a problem where we have so much resistance that our dewormers aren't working anymore. And it's kind of a strange concept, but more and more people, parasitologists, are promoting it. And all Refugia means is that we have a population of worms either in the cows or in the pasture that have not been exposed to our deworming chemicals. So they're there to reproduce, and as they reproduce, they're reproducing worms that are not resistant to our products. Right. So in time, our products should be more effective.
Right.
That's the concept behind it.
Now, kind of switching gears, in terms of external parasite control management, what are you seeing?
And that goes back to your comment that it's seasonal. We're getting away from the fly and the tick issues. And so that kind of control we can just kind of forget about until we go to spring again. But now we're getting into the peak lice season, and that in our areas from November to March. Mm-hmm. And so now is the time to be thinking about cleaning up the herd the best we can so that we don't have a lice break between now and calving.
And you really have to look into your product you're using because it's not all resistant to all external parasites.
Absolutely. So we've got two different types of lice. One are biting, which means they feed on dead skin and hair and those kind of things. And then we have ones called sucking, and they actually burrow into the skin and feed off of blood. Our porons for lice control basically take care of both classes. But if we use our injectable lice control products, they're only going to take care of the ones that are consuming blood, which would be the biting. And so I've seen producers that thought they were on a good lice control program. They were using an injectable. A couple months after they used the injectable, they had a major lice outbreak, and it's because it was sucking lice, not biting lice. We're not saying don't use injectables, but just use the veterinarian's advice and be conscious that the injectable is not going to cover all classes of lice.
Once again, that's another good reason you should always consult with a veterinarian before going into these seasons.
Absolutely. And then, like I say, use your veterinarian's advice, and if the advice didn't work out this time, you can go back to the veterinarian and say, it's not on the producer anymore. It's on the veterinarian. Use their expertise, and your program will probably be more successful.
Gregg, thanks again for being here and once again stressing the importance of parasite control. That was Gregg Hanzlicek, the Director of Field Investigations Unit at the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at K-State. By the way, to learn more about the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory services, go to their website at ksvdl.org. Again, that is ksvdl.org. Beef parasite control was also a topic discussed by a panel of industry experts, including Ty Brunswig, AJ Tarpoff, and David Pugh at the 2019 K-State Beef Stocker Field Day. You can find the entire video from that field day discussing beef parasite control at asi.kstate.edu under the Beef Stocker Field Day tab under the video archives. I'm Britton Rucker, and this is Agriculture Today. We'll return with more after this short break over the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
We're back with Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. Coming to you from the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University is another BCI Cattle Chat. Participating in this week's podcast are veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson. Also joining them is livestock economist Dustin Pendell and cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber. Also along with them is special guest who is a sales manager for a leading cattle chute and handling equipment system manufacturer, Joseph Link. Brad tells us here the topics they'll be focusing on this time around.
So one of the things that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today is really facility design. It's that time of year where we're going to be working cattle. We're going to talk a little bit about evaluating those facilities, and then we're going to spend a fair bit of time because there have been some changes in facilities as you look over our lifetime and even over the last 10 years in what we see out there, and we're going to have a little debate back and forth about which we like better. And then finally, we'll wrap up by talking some about facility costs and how we decide how to make that investment. It's that time of year. We're processing calves. We're going to have the cows go through. We may be preg checking. If you're like me, often I spend a fair bit of time thinking about what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. But then I want to get there and be ready to go, but I may not put in all the prep work I need to. So as you guys think about it, when you're talking to people at this, what would you do now? Let's say I'm 2 weeks ahead of working animals through the facilities. What should I do today?
Well, I want to go back and tie this to the fact that we've just had National Farm Safety Week because, I'll say, and I don't have any data to back it up, but the areas that I see people getting hurt in ranching situations is on a horse, on a tractor, or around the chutes and working facility. And so as we talk about moving into some fall processing, and remember, this is a time when actually safety is an issue that we need to take seriously. And that really starts with, or a big part of it is good upkeep of the equipment and facilities that we have. So if we're a couple of weeks out, to find the time to really go through the facility, make sure that, if it's boards are tight, welds are tight, chains are in place, that everything you can think of, put
Stuff
yourself
hasn't wandered off. So
right.
somebody hasn't
exactly.
robbed 2 panels from some spot that they really need them.
Just because we're dealing with large animals around steel and wood, that if those things break, a person that's in the way, that's where you see people getting hurt. And so really taking that safety seriously.
The footing is also critical, and especially in those areas that will be high traffic or excitable traffic, right? Leaving the chute or coming into the alleyway where they are, be sure that I've got good, solid footing there.
So make sure if the pen wasn't cleaned after last year, maybe put the shovel and wheelbarrow to work. Make sure there's no boards and nails on the ground that they might step on and get an injury.
Now for this part, and this is going to be the fun part, I want to start out with, as we think about the alleyway, should I have that alleyway open-sided or closed-sided?
I'm going to give a little bit of a perspective from a veterinarian that gets on a lot of different ranches and works with a lot of different people with, honestly, a range in their animal handling skills. So I'm going to say I like the solid-sided facilities because a lot of times you get into an operation just because of where it's located or who's helping you, that there's a lot of distractions around the working facility, and I want to block out those distractions with solid sides.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take a bit of either the open or modified open-sided. One of the things that, having been through a couple of stockmanship schools and trying to practice some of these skills, having cattle with the ability to see you and respond to your position can be really helpful in getting the cattle to move through the facility. And for the animals to see you, obviously you have to have open-sided. So I kind of like maybe a mixture of the side that you don't want cattle to be distracted by, solid-sided, and the side that you're working on, and particularly if you're using the walk-by sort of methodology to get the cattle to move,
right,
they have to be able to see you. And so half-sheeted can work really, really well.
And I'm going to jump in real quick. Or you could take both sides and use fully sheeted on one side and low sheeted on the other side to allow for that flow, for the natural flow of the cattle.
So kind of a mix of the
That's
two.
right.
Next question.
Okay. Dun, dun.
Straight or curved in your alleyway?
Right. And I think you can go either way, but I'm going to say that there's a lot of situations because of space constraints that I like the curved, because actually I can fit more cattle in the same square footage with a curved chute. And that's my thought process is I want a long enough alley to fit the cattle that I need in it, and there is a lot of locations where a curved fits better.
My preference is, if possible, straight, but I've worked in lots of ones that have a combination of straight and curved, and designed the right way. I think both can work well.
How long should my alley be? So should I have, and think of a facility, and I'm going to frame it a little bit and say I'm doing cows and calves, and I don't want it in feet, but how many animals should I be able to fit in there? A couple or a lot? And how do I decide?
This is one where I'll have to admit that I'm embarrassed by how long it took me to learn something, and that the way I would say it is, however many cattle fit in your tub or bud box ought to be the number of cattle that fit in your alleyway. And that seems so obvious, and it took me so many years to figure out that those two things ought to be related to each other.
Right.
And back to your point is, if you're continuously feeding your tub, you have to design your system based around your operation. So if you're running 200 head and you're constantly feeding your tub, obviously you can't put 200 in your tub, but the continuous feeding of your tub will allow for the continuous feed to your alleyway. So as long as those animals are continuously moving in with a properly designed system,
but it'll
flow proper.
Another bit on there is properly designed system and properly trained people. We get a lot of students, and it takes a little bit of training, that the number of animals you draft into the bud box or tub is not the capacity of the physical number you can actually squeeze in there.
That's right.
It's how many I need to feed into the alley that's ahead of it.
That's right.
For your operation, find somebody you can work with, whether it's your equipment dealer, your extension agent, your veterinarian, or all of the above. The other thing that I think really works well is go visit some facilities. Go see what works, because most of us that have done any remodels have put it in, and then the first time you worked cattle through, you go, I wish I'd have done that a little bit different, or that gate was hung a little bit over there, or I'd switch this or that. That's okay. Go to some facilities that have been running cattle through for a while. You'll get some good ideas.
Well, and that's whether this is a new facility or a refit or something like that. This is a large investment. There's a lot of steel, a lot of concrete, a lot of times. And so it's a very important decision to make. And
yeah, just reach out to your local agencies to find out exactly where you are and what you're looking for, so that you can design the proper system, whether it's K-State, where the extension, whatever it may be, really has a lot of resources to pull from.
As we make the decision on facility costs, it can be a large expenditure. What are some of the things I need to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. As Joseph pointed out, I think each operation is going to be a little different. So I think you got to figure out exactly what it is you need. And as you're thinking about the cost, some things that I guess keep in the back of your mind, you probably just put a pencil to paper and just kind of sketch it out. What is it? Can you afford? Thinking about maybe from a cash flow standpoint. I assume a lot of companies that sell these products probably also have some financing as well.
Sometimes you'll see the do-it-yourself facility where I'm going to put together pieces and parts from different areas, but I may need to replace those pieces and parts often enough that I think what you're saying is I should get out a spreadsheet or a notepad and do the math. Does it make sense to just go ahead and put in a new facility, or should I keep doing it the way I'm doing it?
Right, and some other things is if you're going to do it yourself, or if you go with it cheaper, are there other issues that we talked about with, injuring the cattle, injuring the humans? So there's some other costs as well.
One of the strategies I know some folks have used on, some of these more expensive kind of purchases is, find a partner, like a real partner, somebody that you do business with, that's in, I'm thinking, some folks have purchased ultrasound equipment to use in on-farm preg check. Well, they partner with 2 or 3 other producers and they coordinate their timing. And a lot of times those folks are, engaged in other parts of their business already. So it makes sense to add on that equipment is something that they share. A portable, really high quality working facility is one that I've heard people talk about. Well, I'm going to go, we've got a stocker operator down the road. They need it at a different point in time than what we needed as a cow-calf producer, and so it makes sense from a timing perspective, or even cow-calf producers that share labor. You can't be at both places at the same time anyway, so it's not that big a deal to pack up a portable facility and move, and when you're sharing day labor and that kind of stuff.
It's a large fixed cost investment, and the more cattle I spread it over, more cattle that run through it, the more efficient it will be. Yep. And so I can do that by partnering with some others or doing some other maybe out-of-the-box type thinking.
Creative financing.
That's right. So I would encourage you tomorrow, this week, go walk your facilities, look on the outside, look on the inside, think about if you want to do any modifications. Now is the time.
From the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University, that was Brad White, Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Bob Weaber, along with special guest Joseph Link, who's a sales manager for a leading cattle chute and handling equipment system manufacturer. Once again, today's BCI's Cattle Chat discussion included considerations when redesigning one's cattle handling facilities. Be sure to hear the entire podcast at beefcattleinstitute.org. Again, that is beefcattleinstitute.org. When we come back, Eric will have the agricultural news headlines and more. For Agriculture Today, I'm Britton Rucker, and we'll be back with more after this break over the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson with you. And over we go now to today's agricultural news page, and these headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. A district court in western Kansas has ruled that the chief water engineer with the Division of Water Resources, Kansas Department of Agriculture, acted properly in approving a water management tool proposed by the Northwest Kansas Groundwater Management District Number 4 to aid in local conservation efforts to extend the life of the Ogallala Aquifer. On Tuesday, the Gove County District Court upheld the adoption of a local enhanced management area, or LEMA, in much of the district. The case, Friesen versus Barfield, was filed under the Kansas Judicial Review Act after 2 public hearings were held by Chief Engineer David Barfield. Barfield then approved the adoption of the LEMA. The case was brought by multiple petitioners who are required under the LEMA plan to reduce the amount of groundwater withdrawn over the next 5 years. The petitioners challenged whether the reductions in water use can be made without those cuts being based on priority, and generally challenged the lawfulness of any cuts or use of a LEMA. Back in 2012, groundwater management districts in Kansas were granted the authority to recommend the adoption of a LEMA in order to implement local water conservation goals through the adoption of control measures recommended in their plan when the conditions demonstrate a threat to groundwater levels, the rate of withdrawal, or water quality. Now, the LEMA process involves meeting specific statutory requirements and holding public hearings before approval by the chief engineer. A LEMA management plan typically requires reductions in water use to achieve the water conservation goal, which is aimed at extending the life of the aquifer. In this case, the plaintiffs challenged both the specifics of the management plan and the constitutionality of the LEMA statute in general. The court ruling this week found that the GMD District 4 wide LEMA should be upheld. The LEMA plan restrictions, it says, do not appear to be unconstitutional on their face or as applied. The court went on to say there is substantial evidence backing the agency's decision, and therefore it's not arbitrary or capricious in the court's statement. The first LEMA in Kansas, known as the Sheridan 6 LEMA, was approved back in 2012 in the Sheridan County area. It was extended in 2017 through 2022 after data from the Sheridan 6 LEMA strongly indicated that the water use goals in the area were met and that significant indicators showed the conservation efforts had slowed the decline of the water table in that region. Trump administration officials assured dozens of representatives from agriculture and biofuels groups earlier this month that the EPA would use a 3-year rolling average of small refinery exemption volumes from 2016 to 2018 to account for any such future waivers. It was the reason that the biofuels groups endorsed that agreement. The next day, the administration announced the details of the deal. The EPA, they announced, would take the average of about 4 billion gallons waived since 2016, about 1.3 billion gallons per year, and would plug that into future renewable fuel standard volume proposals. However, now, and quoting here the chief executive officer of the Iowa Corn Growers Association, Craig Floss, there is outrage that the EPA did not implement the details of that agreement. Floss sharing those thoughts during a news conference yesterday. The agency announced this week a supplemental proposal that calls on accounting for 770 million gallons annually in expected exemptions. That number falls far below the average annual gallons exempted from 16 to 18. In 2018, it waived 1.43 billion gallons at that time. The executive director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, Monty Shaw, said that with this proposal, the EPA has replaced certainty with broad EPA flexibility, as he put it. Quoting him, we're being told that instead of having a deal struck, we have to rely on the good faith of the EPA. Since the EPA announced the 31 new exemptions this summer, Shaw says it was the final nail in the coffin for many biofuels companies. In the proposal, the EPA reverses course on the idea of granting partial exemptions to small refineries. The U.S. Department of Energy has recommended to EPA the possibility of doing that, but the EPA had rejected that up until now. Coming your way next, this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update. And standing by with that is Gregg Hanzlicek. Greg?
Jennifer Greenstein, who is co-chair of the Next Generation of Scientists for Biodiesel, joins us. Jennifer, it's been a very busy time for NGSB. If people aren't familiar with NGSB, what is that all about?
It's a student group run by the National Biodiesel Board that focuses on introducing students to people in the biodiesel industry so you can learn about what actually happens in the real world once you get out of school and make contacts, network. So it's a great opportunity to get to attend conferences and just get to really know the industry and the people that work in it.
And there's a chance for those who might be interested in that field that you guys are giving away a scholarship coming up here pretty soon.
Yes, we are. We do this scholarship. We've done it every year, so we get applicants from really all over the world, but definitely a lot from the Midwest. And write an essay. You become a member of NGSB, which is free for everybody and really fast. And then you can apply for the scholarship, and we go through the scholarship applications. And if you're one of the selected students, you get to attend our National Biodiesel Conference with a travel scholarship that covers most, if not all, of the travel expenses, hotel expenses. And you get to present a poster, potentially a PowerPoint, a flash talk of your research as well. So it's a great experience.
And Jennifer, as part of the conference, there will be a poster session associated with that.
The poster session is part of NGSB. We do that every year at the conference. Usually at least once or twice, we'll have a poster session where people come around and talk to the students. And then we also have networking mixers for the students and some other planned events like tours of a biodiesel plant, for example. So there's a lot going on at the conferences.
And for those who want to be a part of NGSB as well, really has a chance, and you guys have a declaration in this aspect concerning NGSB and what biodiesel will be able to do in the future.
The students that apply are typically working in biodiesel research or interested in promoting biodiesel. We've had some people in economics, even not even in scientific research. We're all interested in promoting biodiesel, and it really is incredible to see the growth and momentum behind the industry. And we get to hear about it, every year at the conferences and the general session. There is a link to the NGSB site through the NBB website. Absolutely.
That is mbb.org. That is Jennifer Greenstein, who is co-chair of the Next Generation of Scientists for Biodiesel, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Gregg Hanzlicek there. Many thanks, Greg. This week's horticulture segment is coming your way next on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
For you now on Agriculture Today, this week's horticulture segment and follow-up for you homeowners who have seeded a cool season lawn here in recent weeks. We'll talk about post-seeding management with our guest once more, Jared Hoyle, turfgrass specialist with K-State Research and Extension. So that grass is in. Hopefully the rains came in a timely way to get good emergence of that stand. However, there were those who, for whatever reason, may not have seeded that lawn by this point. Is it too late to do so?
Well, right now, every day that we get closer to the winter, the probability or success does go down. We like to say around October 15th is a good calendar time of the year, is like a cutoff date, and every day after that, it kind of diminishes just because the cool season grasses like Kentucky bluegrass and tall fescue just don't have the time to develop those roots. And if they don't have a good, healthy root system, with the winter and the freezing and the thawing, those weak root systems can just be completely decimated with that.
So here we are, the 17th of October. There's a little wiggle room with that October 15th date. So if in the next day or two one could get their seeding going, they could possibly get away with that.
That is correct. It's never too late, I seem to think sometimes, but at the same time, you just know that your expectations may not be as high for that stand. or the success of it through the winter. We may get it up and it may look good, but if we do have a hard winter and maybe we have a mild winter, we're not really sure, or have a good snow cover that kind of blankets it, then it may be more successful than we think.
Mm-hmm. It's your judgment call, homeowners, if you haven't seeded. Now, for those who have planted their cool season grasses, post-planting fertilization, what's required here, Jared?
So with fertilization, even if you've seeded or not seeded, we still really like to stick to that nitrogen program, which was up to 3 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet for the entire fall. So if you put some on before with your seeding, then this may be a good time to do your follow-up application, depending on when you did your seeding or when you did that fertilizer application. That last nitrogen application, we still having some warm temperatures, some warmer days. It's going to really get into that plant. That plant's going to soak it up, help develop those roots, and keep that green color through the winter. And then that way, come springtime, it's ready to go and not waiting for us to apply the fertilizer and coming out into the warmer temperatures.
So, in as far as fertilizer product selection, a slow-releasing fertilizer, would that be advantageous here?
You know, there's the options of both slow and quick release products. The later we get into the fall, you definitely want to shift more to a quick release product. That way you don't have that nitrogen slowly releasing into the wintertime where that plant's not have the ability to take it up. I personally just like a quick release because I know it's going to be used right away. It's going to be available to the plant just in case if we do have winter come next week or the following week, then I know that plant has got what it needs instead of wasting time and money and effort going out and applying a slow release product and only half of it being utilized by that plant.
And we only need to really worry about nitrogen at this stage. Phosphorus, potassium, minimal considerations here comparatively.
Yes, comparatively, we really want to just look at the nitrogen to keep that plant growing. Back towards the seeding, we wanted to look and make sure that we had some phosphorus in that plant to help with root development. But if you got that phosphorus down with that new seeding, most of the soils here in Kansas don't really need any phosphorus. If you had a soil test done and it did recommend that, then that's the time to do it. But most of the time, we do not worry about anything other than the nitrogen applications.
Now, you say you'd like to tie in here the value of using what might be a quote, free nutrient source in the form of those fallen leaves as mulch to enhance your lawn project.
That's correct. So if you get out there and you do, if you are on your nitrogen fertilizing plan, and then you go out and you mulch these leaves that are laying in your yard, might take more frequent mowing than the lawn itself needs, but it chops them up and gets them down within the canopy. There's some studies that actually were done quite in the past where they mulched different amounts of depths of leaves, and they saw that, you know, even super thick layers of leaves up to 6 inches had no negative effects on the lawn. Now, going out and mowing 6 inches and mulching it up could be a chore and have a negative effect on your lawnmower. So it may take, you know, mowing over it more than once or trying to get it before it gets too thick. Especially when those leaves start falling, they fall just about all at once, it seems like, depending on the species of trees. And if you're on your nitrogen fertilizing plan and you're mulching these leaves, you have the right nitrogen-carbon ratio that actually helps break those leaves down even faster and just provides, you know, that good organic matter for your soil. So it is a free nutrient for it, and I think mowing leaves is a lot easier than raking leaves and trying to haul them off as well.
No question about that. And this goes for an established lawn as well. Take full advantage of a free resource, in effect.
That is correct. And trying to keep those leaves inside that lawn, mulching them, or even if you had to pile them up and mulch them to use for somewhere in the garden or around your landscape, that's also another option, or using in your compost pile. But we want to make sure we keep them in the lawn and not let them get in the street or down the drain, because it could have some detrimental environmental effects if it gets into the rivers and the streams, just like the clippings and the fertility. Which you keep it in the lawn, it stays in the lawn, and it does good things for the lawn.
Well, one more timely management consideration here. They're evident already. Those dandelions have shown up. Controlling those would be advantageous at this time as well.
That's correct. So if you got your lawn in and you got it seeded and up and you've done a couple mowings, always check the label of whatever you're using for dandelion control. may say wait 2 mowings or 28 days after seeding or emergence. And if you have some weeds, now's the time to get rid of them. During the fall, those dandelions put that energy into that taproot, and so if we can apply a broadleaf herbicide, a common 3 ways that contain 2,4-D or MCPP and dicamba, work really well. It takes that product down to the root so it doesn't come back comparatively, where in the other times of the year we may not get as good success, so fall is the optimal time for those broadleaf weeds. We're having this cooler temperatures, so if we can find a day that it's above 50 degrees, you're going to get a lot better control than that 33-degree morning.
Well, once again, several things that you can carry out, homeowners, as far as post-seeding management of your fall-planted lawn. Good tips all. Jared, thanks for coming over.
Thank you.
He's a turfgrass horticulturist with K-State Research and Extension, Jared Hoyle, and our guest on this week's horticulture segment, meaning that our time is away for this Thursday edition. We'll be right back here this same time tomorrow and hope you'll rejoin us then. Meantime, and for Britton Rucker, Eric Atkinson here bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.